Welcome to your storytelling. Enjoy the stories, and don't forget to subscribe. I still remember the night he came home, eyes alight with excitement. He dropped his bag at the door, barely noticing the dinner I had set on the table. His hands trembled, not with fear, but with uncontainable energy, like he had just touched the edge of something extraordinary. "This is it," he said, breathless. "Our future is about to change." I looked up from my plate, fork suspended mid-air. "What are you talking about?" He sat down across from me, grinning like a man who had just cracked the secret to life itself. "An opportunity. A once-in-a-lifetime chance. I met this guy today. He's killing it in business. He introduced me to this system, this investment model that's foolproof. People are making serious money, and I can get in early." My stomach twisted. Over the years, I had learned to recognize that glint in his eye, the one that meant he had latched onto an idea with the full force of his belief. He was a dreamer, always chasing the next big thing, convinced success was just one risk away. But we had responsibilities, bills, a family. We weren't young kids playing with what-ifs anymore. Still, I wanted to be supportive. "What kind of investment?" I asked carefully. His grin widened. "A system that practically runs itself. All we have to do is invest and bring in a few people. It grows from there. It's passive income, residual. We'll never have to worry about money again." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to trust that this time, his dreams wouldn't come crashing down. But deep down, something felt wrong, and I ignored it. "A business that can't fail," he promised, his voice filled with certainty. His excitement was infectious, and for a moment, I felt myself getting swept up in it. I wanted to believe that this time, just this once, he had found something that would change our lives for the better. We had talked about financial security for so long, but it always felt like a distant dream. We were always one step behind, never able to save enough, never able to catch up with our bills, and always feeling like we were on the brink of something better. His enthusiasm gave me hope. I remember him showing me a brochure. It was slick, professional, and filled with glowing testimonials from people who seemed to have struck it rich. They all claimed the same thing, that this was the opportunity of a lifetime. There were stories of ordinary people, just like us, who had started with nothing and were now living in luxury because they got in early. "Just think about it, Sarah," he said, his eyes shining with the promise of success. "If we put in what we have now, in a few months, we could be sitting on a fortune. We can get out of debt. We can buy a bigger house. We'll have the freedom we've always wanted." I wanted that freedom. I wanted to believe that this was the answer to everything we had struggled with. But something inside me still hesitated. "Are you sure?" I asked again, this time with more uncertainty in my voice. "Absolutely," he said, his smile unwavering. "Trust me, this is going to work. You'll see." And just like that, I agreed. It felt too perfect. Everything about it, from the glossy presentations to the confident sales pitch, screamed opportunity. Too good to be true. But when you're desperate for a way out, you overlook the warning signs. He was already planning how to use the money, how we'd reinvest to maximize our returns. It sounded simple enough, too simple, maybe. I couldn't shake the nagging feeling in the back of my mind, but I buried it under his excitement, under the dream of a life without debt, a life where we weren't constantly treading water. I remember that first meeting. We sat in a sleek office with glass walls that overlooked the city, and the man who presented the opportunity was polished, confident, almost too perfect. He had all the right answers. He spoke with such conviction, with such clarity about how this system worked, that it was hard not to believe him. He told us stories about how he had started just a few years ago and now lived in a mansion. He even showed us pictures of luxury vacations, flashy cars, and the team of people who had joined him. They were all smiling, living lives that seemed unattainable. "That's what we'll have too," my husband said, his voice filled with awe. "We'll be part of this. We'll live that life." It was all so polished, so convincing, but something inside me screamed to stop, to ask more questions, to dig deeper. But I didn't. Instead, I went along with it, swept away by the dream, by the possibility. The pressure to say yes started small, almost imperceptible at first. It was subtle, a casual nudge here, a hint of excitement there. But as the days passed, it became harder to ignore. I could see how badly he wanted it, how badly he needed me to be on board. He talked about it constantly, day and night. Just imagine what this could mean for us, he'd say, his eyes sparkling with excitement. We could quit our jobs. We could travel. We could be free. He wasn't wrong. That idea, the idea of freedom, of finally breaking free from the endless cycle of work and bills, was tantalizing. But it wasn't the reality of what we had. It wasn't the practical, sensible choice. I hesitated, but he kept pushing. Everyone else is doing it, he said one evening. People are making a killing. Don't you want that for us? Don't you want us to have a better life? I did. More than anything. I wanted to see him happy. I wanted to see us secure, not constantly worrying about money. I wanted to trust him. I should have asked more questions. I should have demanded more proof. But instead, I wanted to make him happy. And deep down, I wanted to believe this was the answer. In that moment, I told him I would go along with it. That night, as he sat down at the kitchen table with his laptop, I signed the papers. It was quick. Too quick. There was no moment of pause, no time to think about what we were about to do. The process was smooth, seamless, and it felt like the only thing standing between us and a better life was this small transaction. I watched him as he entered the numbers, our savings, every last cent we had been carefully tucking away over the years. And I didn't stop him. He looked up at me once, his face glowing with excitement. "This is it," he said. "We're in. We're going to make it." I smiled. I should have felt relief, but I didn't. Instead, I felt a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, but I pushed it away. Maybe it was just nerves, I thought. We were investing in our future. This was the right thing to do. But as I looked over the transfer details, a tiny voice in my head whispered, "What if?" I ignored it. We had signed the papers, and now there was no turning back. And just like that, we were in. Days turned into weeks, and the money didn't come in. I kept waiting for the returns, for the profit that was supposed to be just around the corner. But instead, we received constant updates about how the system was growing, about how the team was expanding. Every time I asked him about the money, he reassured me. "It takes time," he would say. "Patience is key. You'll see the payoff soon. We're just getting started." But the excitement that had once filled the house began to fade. The emails stopped being as optimistic. The calls from the business started coming less frequently, and when they did, they always seemed to ask for more. More money, more investments, more patience. "We have to keep pushing," he insisted. "We can't back out now. Look at what we've already put in." But with each passing day, the doubt grew. Why hadn't the money started coming in? Where were the returns? Where were the promises of financial freedom? One evening, I sat down with the bank statement and ran the numbers. We had given more than we could afford. We were running out of options. I looked at him across the table, the weight of it sinking in. "What if we've been scammed?" I asked, barely above a whisper. He froze, his face paling, but he quickly recovered. No, we haven't. We're just a few steps away from something big." But the doubt had settled in, and now it was impossible to ignore. The first sign that things weren't as they seemed came when we got another email, this one warning about delays in the system. It was vague, with a lot of technical jargon that didn't really explain anything. But it was enough to make me question everything. "We're just getting through a rough patch," my husband said, trying to brush it off. "They've had some issues, but it's all part of the process." But even as he spoke, his voice had lost its usual confidence. He was trying to convince himself, just as much as he was trying to convince me. I could see it. The cracks in the facade were starting to widen. The next week, we received another notice. It was worse than the first, talking about technical difficulties and external factors that were causing delays. This time, there was an apology attached, but it was more of a formality than anything. The promises of profit had faded into vague excuses. I started to research more on my own, digging into the business, looking for signs that something was wrong. But the more I searched, the more I realized that there were others who had fallen into the same trap. People who had lost everything just like we had. "Is this really happening?" I whispered one night, staring at my phone, which was filled with articles about pyramid schemes, fraudulent businesses, and financial ruin. He looked at me, his face pale. No, it's not a scam. We just need to be patient. But his words held less and less conviction. I wasn't sure if I believed him anymore. And the worst part? He was still throwing money at it, convinced it would work. The reality of our situation hit me hard one morning when I checked our bank account. We had been living paycheck to paycheck, but now there was nothing left. Nothing but a negative balance that seemed to mock us. I felt the panic rise in my chest. We had put everything into this. All of our savings, all the little bits of security we had managed to hold onto over the years. It was gone, vanished into thin air. I confronted him that evening. What happened to our savings? I demanded, the fear and anger bubbling over. His face drained of color as he turned to look at me. It's just taking longer than expected, he stammered, his words faltering. That's not good enough. I yelled, where is our money? Where is the profit we were promised? He looked down, unable to meet my eyes. It's still coming, he said weakly. You just have to trust me. You have to believe me. But all I could think about was the mounting bills, the notices piling up on the doorstep. We were already late on the rent. We had no savings left. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But as the days went by, the weight of what we had lost crushed me. The dream we had been chasing had turned into a nightmare, and now we had nothing left to show for it. It all unraveled so quickly after that. The emails stopped coming. The phone calls became infrequent, and when they did come, they were nothing but empty reassurances. I could hear the desperation in his voice, the uncertainty that had crept into every conversation. It was the night I Googled the business again and found nothing but warnings. Stories of people who had lost everything, just like us, that I realized the truth. I didn't want to admit it, but deep down, I knew. We had been scammed. The whole thing was a lie. The evidence was right in front of me. The glowing testimonials were fake, the success stories were fabricated, and the business was nothing more than a shell, feeding off people's dreams. When I told him what I'd found, he went pale. You don't understand, he said, panic rising in his voice. It's not like that. I swear. It's going to work. You just have to wait. Please, just wait. But I couldn't wait anymore. The bills were piling up. We were getting eviction notices. Our house, our home, was slipping through our fingers. The dream had turned into a nightmare, and now there was no escaping it. I tried to stay calm, to reason with him, but I could see the guilt and regret in his eyes. He knew we were done. The house of cards had collapsed, and we were left with nothing but the ruins. In the weeks that followed, the denial became his defense mechanism. He couldn't face the truth, couldn't admit that we had lost everything. He kept saying, just a little longer. It'll turn around. But with every passing day, I could see how hollow his words were. We had sold everything. Our furniture, our belongings, anything that could get us a little extra cash. But it wasn't enough. We were sinking fast, and every time I asked him about the investment, he just shrugged it off. You're overreacting, he would say. You don't understand how these things work. I know what I'm doing. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake him and make him see how much damage had already been done. But all I could do was watch as he clung to the hope that he had been right, that somehow things would fix themselves. One night, as I sat by the window, staring out into the darkness, I realized that he wasn't just lying to me. He was lying to himself, too. He had been so sure, so confident that this was the answer, that he couldn't admit the truth. We were broke. We were lost. And I wasn't sure how much longer I could watch him drown in his own delusions. It was a Tuesday when the letter came. I had just finished cooking dinner. The kids were playing in the other room, and my husband was on the phone with someone about reinvesting. I felt a cold shiver run through me as I opened the envelope. It was an eviction notice. We had missed the last 2 payments. I felt the blood drain from my face. I tried to breathe, but my chest tightened. Sarah? My husband asked, looking up from his phone. I think we're in real trouble, I whispered, holding out the letter. He stood up slowly, his face losing color. What do you mean? We're getting evicted. We can't pay the rent anymore. For the first time in weeks, he didn't argue. He didn't tell me to be patient or that things would turn around. He just stared at the paper, his face hollow, the weight of our failure settling in. "We can't let this happen," he said finally, but his words sounded empty. But we were already in too deep, and there was no way out. The days after the eviction notice felt like a blur. We were forced to pack up what little we had left, just a few boxes of clothes, some old furniture, and a couple of sentimental items. The rest was gone, sold to cover debts that we would never be able to pay. The kids were confused. They didn't understand why we couldn't stay in our home anymore, why we had to leave everything behind. I tried to keep the tears from them, tried to put on a brave face, but it was getting harder and harder. When I confronted my husband about the future, his eyes were vacant. He kept saying things like, "We'll figure it out, and it's just a setback." But I could see the weight of the failure bearing down on him, too. He had no answers. "We need a plan," I said one night, trying to keep my voice steady. "We can't keep living like this." He stared at me, his mind clearly elsewhere. I thought it would work," he whispered. "I thought we had something that could change everything." It felt like a punch to the gut. He was still clinging to the hope that everything could be fixed with time. But time was running out. We had no more money, no more resources, no more options. I realized, with a sinking heart, that I was the only one who was truly facing the reality of our situation. And I was terrified. It didn't take long for the blame to start creeping in. At first, it was subtle, a passing comment here, a sharp remark there. But soon, it was impossible to ignore. "You were too skeptical," he told me one night, his voice tight. "If you had just trusted me, we wouldn't be in this mess. You should have believed in the system." I stared at him, shocked. "Me? I should have believed? You were the one who pushed for this. You were the one who promised everything would be okay." He didn't respond. Instead, he stormed off to another room, his anger flaring as he retreated into his own thoughts. I could feel the tension building between us, the frustration, the resentment. It was all starting to spill over. The financial strain had put a massive crack in our relationship, and it was growing wider by the day. But the worst part was that I couldn't escape the feeling that he was trying to turn it all around on me. He couldn't face the fact that he had made a huge mistake, and instead of owning up to it, he was deflecting the blame onto me, onto the people who had warned him, onto everyone but himself. It hurt more than I could explain. But in a way, I wasn't surprised. This wasn't the first time he had let his pride and ego cloud his judgment. I remember the day everything finally snapped. It was a Friday, and we had just moved into a tiny, dingy apartment. The kids were adjusting, but I could tell they were still confused and upset. They didn't understand why things had changed so drastically. I had spent the morning making phone calls, trying to reach out to friends and family for help, trying to salvage something from the wreckage of our lives. But the truth was, there was no one to turn to. We had burned so many bridges along the way, convincing people that we had it all under control when, in reality, we had been sinking for months. That afternoon, my husband came home, his face flushed with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. "They're asking for more money," he said, his voice tight. "They say we need to reinvest to keep our position in the system. If we don't, we'll lose everything." I looked at him, my heart sinking. More money? How much more do they want from us? We've already given them everything. His eyes were wild with desperation. "We have to do this. We don't have a choice." Something inside me snapped. "No," I said, my voice shaking with fury. "We're done. We've lost everything. This isn't a business, it's a scam. And you've dragged us into it." The room fell silent. For the first time, I saw the truth in his eyes. He knew it too. He had lost everything. And this time, there was no turning back. It felt like the world was crashing down around us. The truth was undeniable now. We had been scammed, and there was nothing left to salvage. The eviction, the debts, the empty promises. It was all too much. My husband had become a shell of the man he once was. His confidence, his optimism, had been shattered. He had become a stranger to me. We spent weeks trying to recover, trying to rebuild from the ashes of our former life. But the damage was too great. Our relationship, once filled with dreams and promises, was now strained to its breaking point. I tried to hold on to hope. I tried to believe that we could fix things, that we could find a way to make it through. But every time I looked at him, I saw the guilt and the shame in his eyes. We had lost everything. Our home, our savings, our future, and now I was starting to wonder if I had lost him, too. It wasn't until one quiet evening, when the kids were asleep, that I found myself sitting alone in the living room, staring at the empty walls of our new apartment. Everything felt hollow. There was no joy, no excitement, just the weight of our past pressing down on me. I thought about everything we had gone through, the promises, the hopes, the dreams of a better life. It all seemed so distant now. But in that moment of silence, I had an epiphany. I couldn't change what had happened. I couldn't fix the past, but I could control the future. I stood up, walked over to my husband, who was sitting at the kitchen table, lost in thought. "We can't keep doing this," I said softly. "We can't keep pretending that everything is okay when it's not. We need to face the truth and start rebuilding, together, from the ground up." He looked at me, his eyes hollow and tired. But for the first time in a long while, I saw a flicker of something else, acceptance, maybe even a hint of relief. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I thought I could fix it all. I thought I was doing the right thing." And in that moment, I realized that we could still heal. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to happen overnight. But we had to take the first step. It took a lot of time and effort, but I realized something important. The first step in rebuilding our lives was accepting that we couldn't do it alone. We needed each other more than ever. The past few months had nearly destroyed us, but now we had a choice: to rebuild or to let it all fall apart for good. We sat down together one evening, the kids in bed, and began to plan. There were no more grand promises or delusions of quick fixes. We were starting from scratch, and it was going to take everything we had. "You can't keep going after the next big thing," I told him, my voice steady but firm. "We have to be smart, practical. No more shortcuts. No more trusting people who don't have our best interests at heart." He nodded, his face serious. "I get it. I made a huge mistake. I thought I could fix everything overnight, but I see now that it takes hard work and real effort. No more dreaming of fast money." It wasn't easy. Every step felt like a struggle, and the financial strain didn't magically disappear. But we started finding small ways to get by, working extra hours, cutting down on unnecessary expenses, and, most importantly, sticking together. We were stronger as a team. The kids began to adjust, too. They didn't fully understand what had happened, but they could sense the change. They could see that we were fighting for our future, fighting for our family. And slowly, it started to feel like maybe, just maybe, we could make it through this after all. Even as we began to rebuild, the weight of guilt still hung over him like a heavy fog. It was obvious in the way he would stare off into the distance, lost in thought, or the way he kept apologizing over and over, as if saying sorry could erase the past. "I'm so sorry," he would say. "I should have listened to you. I should have been smarter." It was heartbreaking to watch, but part of me couldn't help but feel a flicker of resentment. He had dragged us into this mess, and now I was the one picking up the pieces. He had been so sure, so certain that this would be the answer to all our problems. And now, here we were, trying to pick up the pieces of a life he had destroyed. But I knew that we couldn't keep living in the past. The guilt was holding him back, and it was starting to weigh on both of us. "I know you're sorry," I said one night, when the silence between us had grown too heavy. "But you can't keep punishing yourself. We both made mistakes. It's done. We have to move forward, together." He looked at me, his eyes filled with gratitude and sadness. I don't know how to fix it." "You're already fixing it," I replied, reaching for his hand. "We're fixing it together." Starting over wasn't easy. In fact, it was harder than anything we had ever done before. But we both knew that if we didn't start fresh, we would never truly move forward. I took on a second job to help make ends meet. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work, and it felt good to know that I was contributing, even if it meant long hours and little sleep. He found work too, though it was a far cry from the business he had been so passionate about. But that didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that we were taking responsibility, and we were fighting for our family. We had to learn how to budget, how to say no to things we didn't need, how to make the most out of what we had. We went through the bills, prioritized what was necessary, and cut out anything that wasn't. There were days when it felt like we weren't getting anywhere, when the weight of our past still haunted us. But there were also days when we could see the light at the end of the tunnel. It wasn't a fast process, but we were making progress, one small step at a time. And in those moments, I started to believe that we might be able to turn our lives around after all. As the weeks turned into months, something shifted inside me. The hopelessness that had consumed me for so long began to fade. I started to feel a sense of pride again, pride in how far we had come. We had come from a place of despair, from the brink of losing everything, to a place where we were starting to find our footing. It wasn't easy. There were still moments of doubt, still days where I felt overwhelmed by the weight of everything. But now, there was hope. My husband had changed. He was more focused, more determined. He had learned the hard way what it meant to work for something, to not rely on empty promises or get-rich-quick schemes. He had lost his way, but now he was on the path to redemption. "We're going to be okay," I told him one night, as we sat together in the small apartment we had made our home. He nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Yeah, I think we are." And for the first time in a long while, I believed him. The rebuilding process wasn't just about finances. It was about rebuilding trust, about healing the wounds that had been caused by our past mistakes. For so long, I had been angry at him for dragging us into this mess, angry at myself for not seeing it sooner. But as we started to rebuild, we both realized that we needed to rebuild our relationship, too. We spent more time together, talking about our hopes for the future, our fears, and our dreams. We had learned the hard way that life wasn't about chasing quick fixes. It was about hard work, commitment, and the willingness to grow. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of doubt, moments where we both questioned if we were doing the right thing. But we were trying, and that was enough. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of peace. Starting over wasn't just about rebuilding our finances or our home. It was about rediscovering who we were as individuals and as a family. Every day felt like a small battle. We were constantly reminded of how far we had fallen and how much work it would take to rise again. The financial strain was still very much present. We were still living paycheck to paycheck, scrimping and saving just to make ends meet. There were days when I felt so tired, physically and emotionally, that it was hard to keep going. But the kids were resilient. They had a strength I hadn't known they possessed. They were growing up fast, but they were also learning valuable lessons about life. They saw us working hard. They saw us fighting for a better future. And that made it all worth it. My husband and I continued to support each other, even when the days felt endless. We didn't have the luxury of looking back anymore. We had to keep moving forward. And slowly, we began to see the fruits of our labor. It wasn't easy, but we were building something better. It may not have been perfect, but it was ours. We had to learn to appreciate the small victories, the little moments of progress that kept us going. There were times when I felt like we were stuck in a never-ending cycle of struggle. But when I took a step back and looked at everything we had overcome, I realized just how far we'd come. Our apartment, though small, had become a home. We had made it cozy, filling it with the things that mattered most: love, laughter, and the promise that we wouldn't give up. One evening, we sat around the table, eating a simple meal. It wasn't much, but it was enough. We had food on the table, we had each other, and that was more than we had in months. "We're making it, aren't we?" my husband said, his voice filled with awe. I smiled, the weight of the past finally starting to lift. "Yeah, we are." It wasn't a grand success. It wasn't the dream we had once envisioned, but it was something better. It was real, and it was ours. Rebuilding trust was the hardest part. For months, I had been angry, bitter, and resentful. I had felt betrayed, not just by my husband, but by the whole situation. The lies, the deceit, the promises that had never come to fruition. It was all too much to bear. But as we moved forward, I began to realize something important. If we were going to heal, we had to trust each other again. We couldn't let the past dictate our future. I started by letting go of the anger. I started by forgiving him, not for the scam, but for the mistakes that had hurt me along the way. He wasn't perfect, and neither was I. But we were in this together. I know I can never make up for what happened, he said one night, his voice full of regret. But I want you to know I'm doing everything I can to fix it, to make things right. I took his hand, and for the first time in a long while, I believed him. As we began to rebuild our lives, something unexpected happened. The weight of our failure started to transform into a new kind of strength. We weren't just trying to survive anymore. We were beginning to dream again. The dreams had changed, of course. There were no more lofty ambitions of getting rich quick. We weren't chasing after easy solutions anymore. Instead, our dreams were grounded in reality, simple, achievable goals that we could work toward together. I've been thinking about starting a small business, my husband said one evening, his voice tentative but hopeful. Nothing big, just something we can manage. I smiled. I like the sound of that. We've learned a lot these past months. We could use what we've learned to build something we can actually control. It wasn't a grand vision, but it was a start. And that's all we needed, a fresh beginning. The turning point came unexpectedly, in the form of a small, yet meaningful gesture. My husband had been working long hours, doing odd jobs to make extra money, and I had been managing the household, taking care of the kids, and keeping everything afloat. It wasn't glamorous, but it was enough. One evening, he came home with a bouquet of flowers, a small but thoughtful gesture that left me speechless. I know it's been tough, he said quietly, handing me the flowers, but I wanted to remind you that we're in this together. You've been incredible, and I'm grateful for everything you're doing. I took the flowers, feeling a warmth in my chest. It wasn't about the flowers themselves. It was about the fact that he had seen me. He had recognized the sacrifices I was making. In that moment, I realized that we had turned a corner. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were starting to thrive. We were no longer just two people living in a constant state of struggle. We were a family, stronger than we had ever been before. Finding stability was a slow process. We learned the hard way that nothing worth having comes easily, but with every passing day, we became more grounded. Our routine started to feel normal again, something I hadn't realized I missed so much until it was there. It was small steps, paying bills on time, making sure we had food in the fridge, making sure the kids felt secure. These were the things that once seemed trivial but now felt like triumphs. We had learned to budget, to live within our means, and to embrace the simplicity that had once felt like a burden. The fear of losing everything still lingered in the back of my mind, but it wasn't overwhelming anymore. We were building something steady. My husband had started working a regular job, nothing glamorous, but it paid the bills. It was a far cry from the life he had dreamed of, but it was enough for us to move forward. We're getting there, I said one evening as we sat on the couch, kids asleep in their rooms. He nodded, a tired but content smile on his face. Yeah, it's not perfect, but it's ours. And for the first time in a long while, that felt like enough. Regret had been one of the hardest emotions to deal with. For months, I had been consumed by it, wondering what we could have done differently, what we should have seen, where we went wrong. It felt like a constant weight on my chest, dragging me down, filling my mind with doubts. But slowly, I began to understand that regret wasn't going to fix anything. It wasn't going to change the past. All it did was keep me stuck in a place of hurt and self-blame. One afternoon, I took a long walk by myself. It had been a while since I had time to just think. As I walked, I realized something. I couldn't keep holding on to the past. We had lost so much, but we had also gained something important, a chance to rebuild. When I returned home, I told my husband, I've been thinking about it. I can't keep regretting what happened. We have to focus on what we can control. He nodded, his expression thoughtful. I've been thinking the same thing. The past can't change, but we can make today better. And with that, the weight of regret began to lift, even if just a little. Over time, we began to see our situation differently. What had once felt like a catastrophe was now something that had reshaped us. We weren't the same people we had been before the pyramid scheme took everything from us. We had grown in ways we never expected. We had learned the value of hard work. We had learned the importance of humility, of accepting that we weren't invincible and that success couldn't be rushed. We had learned how to appreciate the small things, the moments of joy, the laughter of our kids, the quiet nights we spent together. We're stronger now, I said one evening, looking out the window as the sun set. Stronger than I ever thought we could be. My husband wrapped his arm around me, pulling me close. Yeah, we are. I'm proud of us. It wasn't the life we had imagined, but in a strange way, it was even better. Forgiveness wasn't something that came easily for me. For months, I had struggled with the anger and bitterness that came from feeling betrayed. But as time passed, I realized that forgiveness wasn't for him. It was for me. I had spent so long holding on to the resentment, thinking it would somehow make me feel better. But it was only making me more bitter, more distant. I couldn't move forward until I let go of the anger that had defined me for so long. One night, I sat down with my husband, my heart heavy. "I think it's time for me to forgive you," I said quietly. He looked at me, his eyes filled with apprehension. "Are you sure?" I nodded. "It's not about forgetting what happened. It's about moving past it, for the sake of our future. I can't keep holding on to this anger." He reached for my hand, his voice full of gratitude. "I don't deserve it, but I'm so sorry. And I'll spend the rest of my life showing you that I can make it right." And in that moment, I realized that we both had a long road ahead of us. But it was a road we could walk together, with forgiveness, trust, and love guiding us every step of the way. It had taken months, but we had finally settled into a new normal. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. We had rebuilt our lives, one step at a time, and now we were learning to enjoy the simple things. The kids had adjusted, and we had started finding small joys in our new routine. We cooked together, we spent time outdoors, and we laughed more. It wasn't the life we had once envisioned, but it was better in its own way. "We're doing it," my husband said one night as we sat down for dinner. I smiled, looking around the table at our kids, at the life we had built. "Yeah, we are." And in that moment, I realized that, despite everything we had lost, we had gained so much more. We had gained resilience, unity, and the strength to face whatever came next. Patience had become a word we relied on more than ever. In the beginning, everything felt rushed. We were so desperate to get back to where we were, to fix everything instantly. But the more time passed, the more we realized that recovery wasn't about speed. It was about steady progress, day by day. The small victories we had once celebrated, like paying off a bill or getting through a week without major setbacks, began to feel like monumental achievements. It was easy to lose sight of that in the midst of our struggles, but we had learned to embrace patience. We learned to understand that things wouldn't happen overnight, but if we kept working hard and supporting each other, we would get there. Slow and steady, I told my husband one night, as we relaxed after dinner. "That's how we'll get there." He smiled, squeezing my hand. "You're right. We've come this far and we'll keep going, no matter how long it takes." It wasn't the pace we had wanted, but it was the pace that worked for us, and that was enough. Life had been full of disappointments, but somewhere along the way, we started celebrating the small wins, the moments that made us feel like we were actually moving forward. They weren't big, flashy achievements. It wasn't a new car or a lavish vacation. It was the little things, the ability to pay a bill on time, a night without worrying about the future, or hearing our kids laugh without a hint of worry in their voices. One evening, after a particularly tough week, we decided to take the kids out for ice cream. It wasn't much, but it felt like a victory. It felt like a moment we could savor. "We've earned this," my husband said as he handed me a cone, a smile tugging at his lips. I took a bite, savoring the sweet simplicity of the moment. "Yes, we have." It wasn't about the ice cream. It was about the fact that we were still here. We were still fighting, still moving forward, and that was a victory in itself. Through everything we had been through, one thing remained constant: our family. The bond we shared had been tested, stretched, and strained, but it had never broken. We had been through the darkest times together, but we had also seen the light at the end of the tunnel. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table, I looked at my husband and our kids, my heart swelling with pride. They had seen us struggle. They had seen the tears, the anger, the frustration, but they had also seen us rise again. They had seen us fight. "You know, no matter what happens," I said softly, "we've built something amazing. We've built a family that can weather anything." My husband nodded, his eyes full of emotion. Yeah, we have. And I'm proud of us. The kids, oblivious to the depth of our conversation, laughed and joked as we ate. And in that moment, I realized that the strength of our family wasn't just in the good times. It was in how we supported each other through the hard times. Looking back, it was hard to believe how far we had come. The lessons we had learned, sometimes painfully, sometimes slowly, had shaped us into stronger, wiser people. We had learned the value of hard work, the importance of trust, and the necessity of forgiveness. But more than anything, we had learned the power of resilience. The power to keep going, even when everything seemed lost. The power to rebuild, to start over, and to keep fighting for what we believed in. As I sat with my husband, reflecting on everything we had been through, I realized that the life we were building was far more meaningful than the one we had lost. I think we're finally figuring it out, I said, watching our kids play in the yard. He smiled, his eyes warm. Yeah, I think we are. We may not have had everything we once dreamed of, but we had something better, a deep understanding of what truly mattered. We had spent so long trying to rebuild what we had lost, but eventually, we realized something important. It was time to start dreaming again. Our old dreams had been shattered, and that was okay. We didn't need to cling to those fantasies anymore. What mattered now was creating new dreams, ones that were grounded in reality, built on the lessons we had learned. My dream is to open a small business, my husband said one evening, his voice filled with determination. Nothing fancy, just something that can support us and help others along the way. I smiled. I like that idea. We'll do it together, he added, his eyes meeting mine. No more quick fixes, no more schemes. Just us, working hard and making something we can be proud of. It wasn't the grand, flashy dream he had once had, but it was a dream that felt real. It felt achievable. And for the first time in a long time, I was excited about the future. By now, we had come to understand that success wasn't just about the destination. It was about the journey. Every setback, every challenge, every mistake had been a stepping stone to something better. We had to trust the process, even when it didn't feel like things were moving forward. Do you think we're ever going to get there? I asked my husband one night, feeling the weight of uncertainty creeping in. He chuckled softly, looking over at me. We already are. It's not going to happen all at once. But we're doing the work, and that counts. His words settled in my heart. We had come so far, and it wasn't about rushing to an end goal. It was about doing the right things every day. We had learned patience, humility, and resilience. We were doing the work, and that was enough for now. As we continued on our journey, I knew that, regardless of the challenges ahead, we were ready. We had built a foundation that couldn't be shaken, and that was something worth trusting. It was time for a fresh start. After months of struggle, rebuilding, and reflection, we realized that we needed to shake things up in a way that would truly signify a new chapter. It wasn't about leaving everything behind. It was about embracing change, shedding the weight of the past, and moving forward with purpose. We started by decluttering our home, getting rid of things that reminded us of the life we used to have. We didn't need them anymore. Those items no longer held the same meaning. We wanted to create space for new memories, new experiences. I think it's time we moved forward in a new way, my husband said as we sorted through boxes of old belongings. It's about embracing what we've learned and focusing on the future. I nodded. It was time. The fresh start we were craving wasn't about running away from our past. It was about creating a new future. A future where we controlled our fate, where we built something lasting and meaningful. For all the uncertainty and change we had experienced, there was something incredibly comforting about routine. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave us structure. It gave us stability. And for the first time in a long time, we began to look forward to our days instead of dreading them. We spent mornings together, getting the kids ready for school, packing lunches, and sharing a cup of coffee. It wasn't much, but those quiet moments meant everything. It was a reminder that we were still here, still fighting, still moving forward. In the evenings, we sat down to dinner, talked about our day, and shared our dreams for the future. It wasn't the kind of life we had envisioned, but it was a life that we had created together, a life full of love, hard work, and hope. The best part of my day is when we're all together, I said one evening, looking at my family. My husband smiled. Yeah, me too. One of the hardest things we had to learn was how to let go of the things that no longer served us. The past had been painful, but we couldn't keep holding on to it. We had to let go of the resentment, the anger, the fear. We had to release the things that weighed us down in order to truly move forward. It wasn't easy. There were days when the past crept back in, trying to remind us of what we had lost. But every time that happened, we made a conscious choice to let go. We couldn't change it. It was time to focus on the present and the future. We can't keep looking back, I told my husband one night as we sat on the porch, watching the sunset. We need to let go and make the most of what we have. He nodded, his expression soft but determined. You're right. It's time to move on. And with that, we both took a deep breath, knowing that the future was ours to shape. We had come a long way from the despair we had felt in the early days of our recovery. It had been a long and difficult road, but we were finally standing on the other side, stronger, wiser, and more connected than ever. It was time for a new beginning, not just a fresh start, but a true reinvention of who we were and what we wanted out of life. We decided to take the plunge and start that small business we had talked about. We had no idea if it would succeed, but we had learned to embrace uncertainty. We had learned to take risks. And most importantly, we had learned that the journey was more important than the destination. My heart's in this, my husband said, his eyes shining with excitement. This is our chance to build something that lasts. I smiled, feeling the excitement too. And we'll do it together. Just like we always do. We didn't know where the future would take us, but for the first time in a long time, we were eager to find out. Change had once been a word we feared, something that had only brought chaos and heartache. But now, it felt different. Change had become a catalyst for growth, an opportunity to reinvent ourselves and build something better than before. The decision to start our business was a leap of faith. We didn't know if it would succeed, but we knew it was a risk worth taking. It wasn't just about money. It was about reclaiming control over our lives. It was about embracing the future with open arms, ready to face whatever came our way. We've got this, my husband said as we began to plan our next steps. We've been through worse. We can handle anything. I smiled, my heart swelling with hope. I believe in us. And in that moment, I realized that this was the beginning of something incredible. A new chapter, full of possibility and promise. The road to success was never easy. There were late nights, early mornings, and countless obstacles to overcome. But through it all, we kept pushing forward. Every setback became a lesson, every failure a stepping stone. Slowly but surely, the hard work started to pay off. We gained small victories. Our first client, a positive review, a growing list of contacts. It wasn't fast, but it was steady. And with each success, our confidence grew. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day, I looked at my husband. Do you remember when we started? When we didn't know if we could make it? He grinned, tired but proud. Yeah, look at us now. It wasn't the dream we had envisioned in the beginning, but it was ours. And we had built it with our own hands. In the early days of our struggle, trust had been one of the first casualties. The betrayal, the mistakes, everything had shaken the foundation of our relationship. But over time, we rebuilt that trust, brick by brick. Now, as we worked together on our business, that trust was more important than ever. We relied on each other, leaned on each other, and supported each other through the highs and lows. We knew we couldn't do it alone. I couldn't do this without you, my husband said one night, looking at me with gratitude in his eyes. I smiled softly. We're in this together. Always. Trust wasn't something that could be easily restored, but we had done it. And that trust was the foundation of everything we had built. It was hard not to look back sometimes. There were moments when I remembered the life we had lost, the dreams that had slipped through our fingers, the pain we had endured. But every time I looked back, I also remembered how far we had come. We had lost everything, but we had gained so much more. We had gained strength, resilience, and a deeper understanding of what truly mattered. We've been through hell and back, I said to my husband one night as we sat together, reflecting on our journey. But we're still here. He nodded, his expression thoughtful. And we're stronger for it. It was true. The road had been long and difficult, but we had emerged from it stronger than we ever thought possible. And that, in itself, was something worth celebrating. In the midst of all the struggles, it was easy to forget to celebrate the wins. They were small, incremental victories, but they were victories nonetheless. And every time we reached a new milestone, we took a moment to pause and appreciate how far we had come. "We did it," I said one evening, looking at my husband after we had secured our biggest client yet. His face lit up with a smile. "We really did. It wasn't just about the money or the success. It was about the journey, the hard work, and the perseverance that had brought us to this point. We had built something from nothing, and that was something worth celebrating." Even as we saw our business begin to grow, the challenges didn't stop. Each day brought a new set of obstacles, unexpected setbacks that reminded us that success was never a straight line. There were months when cash flow was tight, when clients backed out at the last minute, and when doubt crept in. "I thought this would get easier," my husband admitted one night, running a hand through his hair in frustration. I nodded, understanding exactly how he felt. "It's never going to be easy. But we've made it this far. We can keep going." In those moments of difficulty, we leaned on each other. We reminded ourselves of what we had already overcome, of the strength we had developed together. The road to success was filled with bumps, but we were learning to navigate them, one day at a time. Hope had become our guiding light. It was what kept us moving forward during the darkest times. There were days when we didn't know if we were going to make it, when everything felt uncertain. But it was hope that carried us through. "We can do this," I told my husband one afternoon, after a particularly tough week. "I know it's hard, but we've come this far. We're not giving up now." His eyes softened, and he smiled. "You're right. I believe in us. We'll make it through, like we always do." Hope wasn't a guarantee of success, but it was a promise that we would keep trying, no matter what. It was a promise that, no matter how many times we stumbled, we would always rise again. As our business continued to grow and we found more stability in our lives, I realized how much gratitude had changed our outlook. We had learned to find joy in the small things: the morning coffee shared between us, the quiet evenings after a long day of work, the laughter of our kids in the next room. "We're finally finding peace," I said to my husband one night, sitting together on the couch. He nodded, taking my hand. "Yeah, we've earned it." It wasn't about the big successes or grand achievements anymore. It was about the moments in between, the quiet, everyday moments that meant the most. We had learned to appreciate them because they were the moments that made life worth living. Looking ahead, I couldn't help but feel a sense of hope and excitement for the future. Our journey had been filled with hardship, but it had also been filled with growth. We had learned so much about ourselves, about each other, and about what it meant to truly fight for a better life. "We've come so far," I said, my voice full of emotion. "And we're not done yet." My husband squeezed my hand, his eyes full of determination. "No, we're just getting started." Together, we had built something more than just a business. We had built a new life, a life that we were proud of. The future was full of uncertainty, but it was also full of possibility. And no matter what came next, we knew we would face it together, stronger than we had ever been before. Thank you for listening to my story until now. If you like the video, please support it by subscribing and liking.